Mention Las Vegas, foreclosures, and Mitt Romney, and most people think of his famous statements to the Review Journal editorial board last year, quote, "Don't try and stop the foreclosure process, let it run its course and hit the bottom." In conjunction with his visit to Las Vegas Friday, Romney released what the campaign called a white paper on the foreclosure issue. Here's Romney describing some of his plan at his Las Vegas rally.
Now maybe some of you have tried to get a mortgage lately. And if you have, you'll find out how hard it is to get a mortgage lately. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of a confusing thing, but they passed this law called Dodd-Frank, and in there they say that if you don't give out a qualified mortgage, it has to be a qualified mortgage, or you could face very serious penalties. Now the only problem is they didn't define what a qualified mortgage is.
All right, we're joined by Howard Watts of the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, PLAN as it's affectionately known, which has been advocating on foreclosure issues for quite some time, blaming pretty much everyone, including, I should point out, the Obama administration. I wanted to show the clip that we just saw of Romney talking about the qualified mortgages and Dodd-Frank being standing in the way of fixing the housing crisis, and ask you, is that what's the problem here? Is that Dodd-Frank is standing in the way of fixing the foreclosure crisis?
Well, no, Hugh. I mean, Dodd-Frank is our nation's attempt to try and curb back the abuses that got us into the mess that we were in, where the mortgage and the housing market was in a free fall. So I don't think getting rid of it or cryptically reforming it, Romney's given no specifics on how he would reform it, is a way to try and, solve the problems that homeowners face.
I do want to point out that Mr. Romney's rhetoric on Dodd-Frank, which is to suggest reforming it as opposed to a full repeal, differs from many conservatives, and I'm surmising that one of the reasons we didn't get a lot of details as to how he would like to reform it is that he doesn't want to come under criticism not only from the opposition but from his own side, from people who are pushing for Dodd-Frank changes. I guess what I want to ask is, how would Dodd-Frank need to be reformed? I mean, essentially, in a nutshell, there was an oversight council set up to do all kinds of different things, as you said, to put a stop to some of the shenanigans. And I do want to say, for the record, some of these guys, Goldman Sachs in particular, should have not just declared bankruptcy as they were forced to do. Probably some of them should have gone to jail for some of what they did. And there were all kinds of accounting rules put into effect. But as you say, it wasn't to hurt the lenders. It wasn't meant to hurt the homeowners. It's to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Is there some kind of reform, though, that you would support?
Actually, what I support is the implementation of Dodd-Frank. There have been members of Congress that have been stonewalling on different measures of Dodd-Frank's implementation. And some of these truth in lending statements have actually made it easier and simpler for borrowers to understand the process that they're engaged in. And other things like the Volcker rule, which would limit banks' ability to take our money that we put in the bank and gamble with it in the market, are things that have been delayed, and they should be implemented. Okay, and on the subject of foreclosures, we've got a chart we put together. I want to take a quick look at it. It's the history of the foreclosure rates here in Nevada from the current year going back to 2007. What's notable here, you notice 1 in 402 homes this year, 1 in 118 last year, 1 in 84 the year before that, and you can see it's the volatility here is really notable. Looking just at 2012 and 2011 real quick, what accounts for the difference in the rate? Well, the Nevada legislature last year actually passed a law that essentially required that before a bank can foreclose on a homeowner, they have to have all of the proper documentation showing that they have the right to do so. And apparently banks took a lot of time to try and find their paperwork, and that caused the foreclosure rate to drop. Governor Romney has said that he wants to responsibly sell the homes that are just sitting on the market. But my questions are, how and to whom? To invest,
and for how much?
Right, to investors.
For pennies on the dollar?
Right, for pennies on the dollar, illegally without all the documentation in order. So it's just, it's lacking the detail that shows some of these proposals are similar to what President Obama said.
All right, and we will get into what President Obama has advocated, implemented, or not. when we return with Howard Watts right after this.
Welcome back to the agenda. We're here with Howard Watts III, a field director for the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, and we are discussing Mitt Romney's and now President Obama's plans to fix the foreclosure crisis. Okay, right before we went to break, we talked about how there weren't that many specifics in the Romney plan. Neither from President Obama have there been that many great specific ideas. I gleaned one thing from Romney's new plan that I thought was interesting, and he said he supports something called shared appreciation. And what this is that a bank would write down the principal of a mortgage, basically refinance it for an owner so they could stay in their home, but they would get a cut of any price increase when the homeowner eventually sells that home. And that seemed to me like that might be a pretty good deal for both parties. What do you think?
Oh, I mean, you know, we're in favor of common sense solutions, and that sounds like a common sense solution. My only caveat is what kind of modification. Some of the modifications that homeowners are being offered don't really do much to substantively help them in the long term. They're still left vastly underwater, but just with lower payments. So, you know, in that case, a shared appreciation modification, it really depends on what help is being given to the homeowner.
Well, and I want to get into some other ideas about writing down the principal on these mortgages in a minute. But with respect to Romney's idea, I mean, it seems to me that banks have had ample incentive to go in and write down mortgages already. I mean, the option is you write it down, get something back, or you sit there and let the house get foreclosed on, sit empty, deteriorate, dilapidate, what have you, and then go sell it for pennies on the dollar. So the incentives are already there. Why aren't they writing down, why aren't the banks doing this already?
Well, you know, the incentives aren't just there for modifications, and the range of modification options is large. You know, recently the first report on banks' activity from the foreclosure settlement showed that short sales were the #1 remedy that banks were using to claim, you know, kind of the damages that they'd been ordered to pay. Bank of America actually didn't do a single modification. So, you know, they just see these other options on the table that destroy families, but allow them to collect.
Well, and this makes me suspicious of a plan like the one Romney has announced, this shared appreciation thing, is I'm just not convinced that banks are going to do anything unless they're forced to do it. But I want to move very quickly into principal reduction. And, of course, the Obama administration has proposed some measure of principal reduction, and then the person that regulates Freddie and Fannie basically said, no, we can't do this, it'll cost us too much money. What is the status of that now?
Well, you know, there are homeowners all over the country who are demanding that Mr. DeMarco be fired. And
that's the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency that regulates Freddie and Fannie. Yeah.
And it remains to be seen whether Obama will use his powers to make a recess appointment and remove Mr. DeMarco. But I was in a protest in Los Angeles at their regional office a couple of weeks ago, and folks are going to be marching on D.C. to raise this issue because Fannie and Freddie are basically held by us. And despite what President Obama has put forward as a proposal, they're unwilling to do something to substantively help homeowners whose mortgages they back.
President Obama has been criticized by many, and I think by your folks as well, sir, that he hasn't done nearly enough, not nearly enough, not fast enough, and that we're still sort of just biting at the edges of this problem. And you know, we've got 6 years of, we saw the rates there over the past 6 years, that we've got years more of this in front of us if we can't come up with some kind of a solution. Where's the president's leadership on this?
Right, well, unfortunately, one of the problems is there is no silver bullet, and I think that's one of the reasons why the president doesn't bring it up in Nevada, but he needs to, because it's a key economic issue. It's a key issue for Nevada families. You know, he's acknowledged that there's more that he would like to do, but you know, I think that you know, it's just been difficult for him to get some things moving with Congress locking him up.
I hate to be defeatist about this or any other issue, but this actually reminded me of the Iraq War, I was thinking this morning, and that is that sometimes mistakes that we make are so massive that you just can't fix them. And this foreclosure mess and the housing crisis and the damage that it has done to the economy and consumer demand and hindered economic development and economic recovery ever since just seems like it might be one of those problems.
Yeah, it's a big, big problem. All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Mr. Watts, for joining us today. We appreciate your insight on this pretty complicated issue. Hugh and I will be back to share some final thoughts right after this.